Half an hour later, they sat across from each other at a small cafe tucked between alleyways, disguised by potted plants and soft jazz humming through the speakers. It was one of those places they used to frequent before the silence had settled in, before that one night when everything started to splinter. Neither of them addressed that yet. They talked around it, like two architects examining a cracked foundation without daring to press too hard in case it collapsed entirely. "You're working on something new?" Taehyung asked, lifting his cup, eyes briefly meeting Jungkook. Jungkook nodded, fingers toying with the sleeve of his hoodie. "Yeah, something personal." "That demo you sent me last year, was it about me?" Jungkook hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." Taehyung didn't look away. "I thought so." A beat passed. "I didn't hate it." That pulled a slight laugh from Jungkook. "Didn't hate it? That's high praise coming from you." Taehyung smiled faintly. "I hated the reason it had to be written." Jungkook's eyes darkened with understanding. "Me too." The truth lingered between them, soft and heavy. They didn't apologize, not yet, not directly, but they didn't need to. Every sentence, every pause, every glance was a layer peeled back, a vulnerability exposed. Later that day, they returned to the company building together. The staff noticed, of course. Whispers trailed behind them like echoes, but none of that mattered. What mattered was the way Taehyung didn't flinch when Jungkook stood beside him in the elevator. What mattered was that they didn't avoid each other's gaze during rehearsals. Their first performance together after the livestream incident was for a private fan event, intimate, raw, the kind of setting where even the smallest expressions didn't go unnoticed. When Taehyung stepped forward for his solo part, Jungkook instinctively looked at him, eyes locked, and Taehyung looked back. That moment, that silent communion, set the internet ablaze. Fans captured it, shared it, zoomed in on the exact frame where Jungkook's mouth twitched into a smile and Taehyung's shoulders seemed to ease. The fandom didn't need explanations. They could read the spaces between breaths. The reunion wasn't publicized, wasn't confirmed in statements or interviews, but it was there. Days passed, then weeks. They started spending time in the studio together again, not always talking, but existing in the same space without tension. Music became their language when words failed. Taehyung hummed harmonies to Jungkook's Demos. Jungkook played guitar while Taehyung scribbled lyrics on coffee-stained napkins. But healing wasn't linear. One evening, during a vocal session, Taehyung snapped. "You're pushing too hard," he said sharply, as Jungkook went over a chorus for the sixth time, jaw clenched. "I'm fine," Jungkook insisted. "No, you're not. You haven't been fine since before we even started this." Jungkook froze, the room charged with something electric and raw. "And what about you? You think you've been fine?" Taehyung's eyes flashed. "I never said I was." "Then stop acting like this is just about me," Jungkook said, voice low. "You left too, Taehyung. You stopped calling. You disappeared." "I didn't know how to come back," Taehyung whispered, and the room fell still. "I didn't know if you wanted me to," he added, barely audible. The fight dissolved into silence. No dramatic walkouts, just two boys, bruised by their own silence, realizing the damage wasn't from one punch but 1,000 unsaid things. That night, Jungkook sent a voice memo instead of a text. "I miss who we were, not just the public version, the real us. The way we used to talk about anything. I know it won't be the same again, but maybe it can be something new, if you want that too." Taehyung listened to it 3 times before replying, "Come over." They sat on Taehyung's rooftop, wrapped in blankets, watching the city lights flicker below them like stars fallen from the sky. "I was afraid that if we talked again," Taehyung said, "we'd ruin whatever was left." Jungkook looked at him. "But we didn't, we're still here." Taehyung nodded. "Yeah, we are." He passed Jungkook his phone. "Play me the demo." Jungkook hesitated, then pressed play. The song was rough, honest, a little out of tune in places, but it carried every emotion he hadn't been able to say, and when it ended, Taehyung's eyes were wet. "You're stupid for writing something that beautiful and hiding it," he whispered. Jungkook laughed through a shaky breath. "I was waiting for the right time." Taehyung leaned his head on his shoulder. "This is the right time." And so they began again, not from where they left off, but from where they were now. Changed, yes, but not broken, never broken. In the following weeks, a surprise announcement shook the fandom. A digital release titled Silence Never Meant Goodbye, a collaborative single written and performed by Jungkook and Taehyung. No teasers, no promotional photos, just a drop, unexpected and raw. The lyrics told a story of distance, of pain, of reconciliation. Fans cried, critics praised. An army knew without needing confirmation that this was their way of speaking the truth. One night during an interview, a journalist cautiously brought up the moment Taehyung stopped mid-live. Taehyung didn't look away this time. He glanced at Jungkook, who gave a slight nod. "I froze," Taehyung said, steady, "because I was scared. But sometimes you have to stop before you can really start talking again." And that was it. No scandals, no drama. Just healing. And the silent, unshakable bond between two souls who found their way back. LANJUTKAN, EPSDI, ATAS DNGN, MENGUNAKN 10,000 kata. Dan LANJUTKAN TAMPA POIN POIN DI ATAS. SRTA HILANJKAN kata kata 10,000 Dan HILANJKAN TULSAN episode. Dan LANJUTKAN DNGN PANJANG. Dan MENGUNAKN BAHASA INGGRIS. Understood. I'll continue the story in immersive, uninterrupted cinematic prose using English, as requested. Please note that due to interface limitations, I will continue the story across multiple responses. Here's the next long installment. The rain started sometime after midnight. A soft patter at first, like whispers against the glass, then slowly growing steadier, heavier. In the silence of Jungkook's apartment, it was the only sound aside from the occasional creak of the wooden floor as he paced, barefoot, hoodie hanging off one shoulder, a mug of untouched tea cooling on the windowsill. The city outside was a blur of lights distorted by rain, and for a long moment, he just watched it, chest rising and falling with a rhythm that didn't match the storm. He hadn't slept. Again, the rush of the release, the way Silence Never Meant Goodbye had shattered the internet, should have brought him peace, closure, or at least rest. But instead, it unearthed everything he'd buried. Not pain this time, not anger, just memory. The way Taehyung used to hum in the green room before every performance. The way they used to speak in glances, full conversations passed in a second with no words. The way the quiet between them once felt like safety, not exile. The notification lit up his phone screen with a soft buzz. A message. "Are you awake?" Jungkook didn't answer right away. He just stared at the words like they might burn through the screen. Then, finally, he typed back. "Yeah, I can't sleep." "Me neither," Taehyung replied. Then, "Want to go for a drive?" By the time Jungkook stepped out into the hallway, Taehyung was already leaning against the far wall, hoodie up, hands in pockets, rain dripping from the edge of his sleeves. They didn't speak at first. No greeting, no explanations. Just an understanding passed in silence as they walked together through the parking garage and climbed into Taehyung's car. The roads were mostly empty, Seoul half asleep under the weight of the storm. Taehyung drove without a destination, one hand on the wheel, the other tapping restlessly against the doorframe. Music played low through the speakers, an old jazz track they once listened to on tour, when things were simple and the only thing that mattered was the next stage. "Do you remember Osaka?" Taehyung asked after a while, voice soft, almost drowned by the rain. Jungkook turned his head. "The hotel or the night market?" Taehyung smiled faintly. "Both, but the market. That night you dragged me to find that one takoyaki stand you swore was the best in the city." "It was," Jungkook said with a laugh. "You just didn't want to admit it because your favorite place was closed." It started raining then too, Taehyung said, eyes still on the road. But we didn't run. We just stood there eating like idiots, soaked to the bone. Jungkook's laughter faded into a sigh. That was the last time I saw you cry, quietly. You thought I didn't notice. Taehyung's grip on the steering wheel tightened slightly. I had a nightmare that morning. About losing everything. Us, the group. I didn't know why, it made no sense back then. But now it does, Jungkook said quietly. The car rolled to a stop near the Han River, their favorite spot before everything went quiet between them. They sat in silence, the rain creating ripples across the windshield, city lights shimmering in broken patterns on the water beyond. Do you still think about what would have happened if we'd talked earlier? Taehyung asked. Jungkook nodded. All the time, but maybe we needed the silence to realize how much we meant to each other. Taehyung leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes. I hated you for a while, he admitted. I hated myself too, Jungkook said, for pushing you away, for being too proud to ask if you were okay. Taehyung looked at him then, eyes raw, not from sadness, but from relief. But you asked now. And you answered, Jungkook whispered. They didn't hug, they didn't cry. They just sat there, breathing in the same rhythm again after so many nights apart. By morning, when the storm passed and the sky began to soften with hints of blue, they were still there. Quiet, steady. The world woke slowly. Fans posted more clips of the song, new theories, new edits, filling the internet with speculation and celebration alike. But neither of them checked their phones. Not yet. Later that day, at the label's meeting room, the manager mentioned a surprise fan meeting opportunity. We're thinking something small, she said. Just you two. It could be a way to address everything. Or say nothing at all and just let the performance speak. Taehyung glanced at Jungkook, then back at her. Let the music speak. And so they did. The fan meeting was set in a cozy venue, nothing extravagant. Just velvet seats, warm lights, and a single mic stand center stage. Tickets sold out in minutes. The day of the event, fans arrived not knowing what to expect, an interview, a talk, a performance. Instead, they were greeted with silence, then a piano note. Jungkook stepped out first, dressed in black, barefoot hair falling softly over his eyes. He walked to the mic with no fanfare. Then Taehyung joined him, equally simple, equally present. They didn't smile. They didn't pose. They stood side by side and sang. The new arrangement of silence never meant goodbye was stripped down, haunting. Just their voices, just the truth. And when Taehyung's voice trembled on the second verse, Jungkook reached out, not dramatically, not performatively, and brushed his fingers against Taehyung's wrist, anchoring him. Fans wept. After the song ended, they didn't rush off stage. Taehyung stepped forward, staring into the crowd with a look that could have shattered anyone's composure. There were a lot of things we didn't say, he began, and a lot of things we thought we couldn't. Jungkook stood beside him, nodding slowly. But silence doesn't always mean indifference. Sometimes it's the only way we know how to protect what we're afraid to lose. Taehyung looked at him, voice dropping to a whisper. But we're done being afraid. The lights dimmed, the fans stood, and without a single question being answered directly, everything suddenly made sense. In the days that followed, the world felt different, lighter. Taehyung and Jungkook returned to practice with the group, their banter returning piece by piece. Jimin teased them mercilessly, Yoongi smirked knowingly, and Namjoon gave them space, watching with the quiet pride of someone who knew what it meant to break and rebuild. One night after rehearsal, Jungkook pulled Taehyung aside. There's a song I haven't finished. Taehyung raised a brow. Yeah. I want to do it together, not just vocals. I mean write it fully with you. Taehyung grinned. You're finally letting me touch your lyrics. Don't make me regret it, Jungkook muttered, already handing him a notebook. They worked through the night. The studio filled with laughter, bickering, coffee, and moments of quiet that no longer carried tension but comfort. They wrote about everything and nothing. about youth, loss, forgiveness, fear, and above all, hope. The song was called Still Here. And when they performed it at their anniversary concert months later, standing at opposite ends of the stage before slowly walking toward each other, fans screamed, cried, and held their breath. Because this time, when Taehyung looked at Jungkook and Jungkook looked back, there was no hesitation, only truth. And it was louder than any silence had ever been. The rain had long stopped, leaving behind a fragile silence in streets bathed in silver reflections. Morning rose slowly over Seoul, a soft glow creeping through the buildings like it was trying not to wake anyone. Inside the studio, Taehyung sat cross-legged on the carpeted floor, barefoot and hoodie wrinkled from sleep. His guitar lay across his lap, fingers quietly brushing over the strings without pressing down. The notes didn't come yet, just the breath before melody, the pause before creation. Behind him, the curtain fluttered in the wind from an open window, and the city hummed faintly below. He didn't notice Jungkook enter until the scent of coffee filled the air. Jungkook said nothing at first, simply set the cup beside him and sat down, mirroring his position. There was no tension between them anymore, not like before. Just a deep, lived-in quiet, the kind that only came after you had broken and rebuilt something by hand. "You couldn't sleep again?" Jungkook finally asked. Taehyung shook his head. "Not really, but it's not the same as before, it's not heavy." Jungkook nodded slowly. "I get it, like, the silence doesn't hurt anymore." "Exactly," Taehyung said, eyes still on the guitar. There was a long pause where neither said anything, yet everything was understood. They sat there as the sun rose higher, casting golden light across the polished floor. The old wounds were still there, faint scars beneath the surface, but they had learned not to hide them anymore. Later that day, the group gathered in the practice room. The air buzzed with laughter, sweat, and half-finished harmonies. Jimin playfully shoved Jungkook toward Taehyung, who retaliated with a smirk and a mock push. Even Yoongi cracked a smile, muttering something about children as he adjusted his mic. But Namjoon noticed the difference. The way Jungkook and Taehyung didn't just move around each other but moved with each other, like two parts of a whole finding their rhythm again. During a break, Taehyung disappeared into the back hallway. Jungkook followed a few minutes later, finding him standing near the window, watching the light play on the rooftops. "I've been thinking," Taehyung said without turning. "Dangerous," Jungkook replied, trying to lighten the moment, but there was warmth behind his voice. Taehyung smiled slightly. "About how it all started, how we ended up not speaking. It wasn't one moment, was it?" "No," Jungkook admitted. "It was 100 small ones, misunderstandings, pride, fear. And maybe we thought we didn't need to say things out loud, that the bond was strong enough to survive the silence. But silence became the problem," Jungkook whispered. Taehyung finally turned to him. "I don't want that to happen again, not with you." "It won't," Jungkook said firmly. "We've already made it through the worst of it." They stared at each other for a long moment, the kind of gaze filled with years of memories, pain, laughter, trust. "Let's make a promise," Taehyung said. Jungkook tilted his head, "to never fight again." Taehyung laughed softly. "No, that's unrealistic. But let's promise to never let silence be the only thing between us. If something's wrong, we talk. If something hurts, we say it, even if it's messy." Jungkook extended his pinky. "Deal." Taehyung linked his own. "Deal." The next week, they were scheduled to appear together on a variety show, a rare, intimate sit-down about the songwriting process behind Still Here. Cameras were rolling. Lights were up. But the air between them was calm, unforced. When the interviewer asked about their long period of separation, both of them paused. "It wasn't easy," Jungkook admitted. "We had to relearn how to listen." "And how to speak," Taehyung added. "But I think that's what made the music honest." "Was there a specific turning point?" the interviewer asked. Taehyung nodded. "Yeah, when someone mentioned his name during a live stream, and I couldn't speak. That was the moment I realized how deeply it hurt to be silent. Jungkook looked at him, eyes soft, and that was the moment I realized I needed to hear him again. The interviewer sat back, visibly moved. The audience, silent and attentive, felt the gravity of their words, the weight behind them. It wasn't just a comeback, it wasn't a publicity arc. It was real, raw, unvarnished. After the show, fans flooded social media with messages of support. Edits of the interview went viral. Old clips of their interactions resurfaced, now viewed through a lens of healing and understanding. Even members of the media who once speculated about feuds now wrote about resilience. Back in the dorms, the group gathered in the living room. Taehyung sprawled across the couch while Jungkook sat cross-legged on the floor, phone in hand. Jimin watched them with a half-smile, arms crossed. "You two are exhausting, you know that," he said. Taehyung grinned, "Only because we're dramatic." "No," Yoongi said from the kitchen, "you're dramatic. Jungkook's just too stubborn to let go." Jungkook raised his hands in surrender. "Guilty." Namjoon chimed in, leaning against the wall. "Whatever it was, I'm glad it happened, because now you both know how to come back." They all fell into comfortable silence. This time, it wasn't heavy. It was the kind of quiet that existed between people who had weathered storms together. The next day, Taehyung showed up to Jungkook's door with a small envelope. "What's this?" Jungkook asked. "A photo," Taehyung said, "from that night in Busan, the takoyaki stand." Jungkook opened it and smiled. It was blurry, rain-smudged, but there they were, two soaked, grinning boys, mouths full, eyes bright with something unspoken. "I kept it all this time," Taehyung said. "I thought I'd lost you, but turns out I was the one hiding." Jungkook looked at him, then back at the photo. "Let's not lose each other again." "We won't." In the months that followed, their bond only grew stronger. Not just for the cameras, not just for the fans, but for each other. For the parts of themselves that had once been afraid to be seen. They collaborated on more songs, created new traditions, and even took an unannounced trip back to Osaka, this time not to relive the past, but to rewrite it. And when Taehyung went live again one night, months after that fateful silence, someone once more asked, "Do you miss Jungkook?" He didn't freeze. He smiled. "No," he said, "because now he's always here." And somewhere across the city, Jungkook laughed. He didn't need to see it. He didn't need to hear it. He felt it. Because some silences break people. But others, they become songs. The street outside the studio was wet again. A fine mist clung to the pavement, wrapping the city in a kind of quiet that felt intentional, as though the world itself understood something delicate was in motion and had decided to move a little slower. Taehyung stood by the entrance, umbrella in hand, the collar of his coat turned up against the drizzle. He wasn't waiting for anyone, not really, and yet his eyes kept flicking toward the end of the road, drawn to the possibility of a familiar silhouette appearing in the fog. A memory lived at that corner, Jungkook's figure, soaked and laughing, sprinting toward him with a paper bag of dumplings they never ate because the rain had melted the paper and everything fell to the sidewalk. It had been the first time Taehyung had laughed so hard his chest hurt. The memory wasn't painful, not anymore. It was simply there, like a scar that had healed clean. Inside, Jungkook adjusted the levels on the soundboard. He was alone in the mixing room, sleeves rolled up, hair falling into his eyes, lips slightly parted as he mouthed along to a melody that only existed in pieces. The track was raw, barely shaped, but it had a heartbeat, a rhythm that pulsed with something gentle and aching. He layered a soft harmony over Taehyung's recorded vocal and sat back, letting the sound wash over him. There was a richness to Taehyung's voice now that hadn't been there before. Not that it had been lacking, but there was a new layer, a breathiness at the edges, like each word carried the weight of having been nearly lost. Jungkook closed his eyes and let it sit in his chest. The honesty of it, the unspoken forgiveness. When Taehyung entered, he didn't announce himself. He just walked in, umbrella dripping by the door, and sank into the couch without a word. Jungkook didn't look over. He didn't need to. The room shifted with his presence, the air drawing in slightly, like it recognized the harmony that only existed when the two of them were in the same space. After a moment, Jungkook pressed pause on the track. "Too soft?" he asked. Taehyung shook his head. "No, it's perfect, it sounds like us." They sat in silence again, but it wasn't empty. It was a silence filled with shared breaths and subtle glances of unfinished thoughts that no longer needed to be finished. They were learning how to speak in this new language, one made of soft truths and present hearts. After a while, Taehyung stood and walked toward the piano in the corner of the room. It hadn't been tuned in weeks, and the keys responded with a quiet, imperfect resonance. He played anyway, not a song. Just notes, meandering and hesitant like footsteps in a room they'd once avoided. Jungkook watched him from behind the glass, one hand resting on his chin. There was something sacred about the way Taehyung approached music now. He wasn't trying to impress or perfect, he was simply expressing, and that made the sound whole. When Taehyung finished, he let his hands fall into his lap and turned, eyes meeting Jungkook, through the divider. No words passed between them, but the message was clear. "Come sit. Let's make this ours." Jungkook entered the room and sat beside him, fingers immediately finding the higher notes while Taehyung hovered on the lower range. They built something together then, quietly, intuitively. The melody was simple, but it felt eternal, like it had existed long before they'd found it. They didn't speak for the next hour. They just played. And when it ended, when the final note dissolved into the walls, Taehyung turned to Jungkook and said, "Let's never let fear write our silence again." Jungkook nodded. "Let's promise that every time it gets too quiet, we write instead." Their song, eventually titled after the rain, became more than a release. It became a statement, a healing. It wasn't flashy or chart-hungry. It was delicate, almost unpolished by design. And the fans felt it. ARMY clung to every lyric, every breath between lines. It wasn't just about reconciliation, it was about growth, about two people stepping out of their own shadows. In interviews, they didn't elaborate. They didn't need to. The music did the talking. One night after a fan event, they found themselves on the roof of the venue, city lights flickering beneath them like constellations. Jungkook leaned against the railing, eyes scanning the horizon. Taehyung stood beside him, sipping from a bottle of water, hair messy from the show. "Do you think it's possible," Jungkook began, "that we had to fall apart to find each other again?" Taehyung considered it. "I think we had to break to see what was worth rebuilding." "And was it?" Taehyung looked at him then, really looked, more than anything. There were no dramatics, no swelling music, just a gentle pat on Jungkook's back, a shared laugh, and the kind of look that carried years in a single second. Weeks passed, the seasons shifted again. Their bond, now stronger than ever, became a quiet pillar in the group. The others noticed how Jungkook smiled more freely when Taehyung was around, how Taehyung's laughter lingered longer when Jungkook was beside him. They still fought, still teased, still got on each other's nerves, but there was a foundation now deep and unshakable. At one point, during a documentary shoot, the director asked, "What do you think is the most important thing you've learned from each other?" Taehyung went first. "That love doesn't always look like what you expect. Sometimes it's in the hard conversations, in staying, even when it's uncomfortable." Jungkook's voice was quieter. "I learned that silence is only peaceful when it's shared. Otherwise, it's just noise inside your head." The footage made the final cut. It aired, and fans across the world paused at that moment because they could feel the truth in it, the weight, the relief. That night, after the episode premiered, Taehyung and Jungkook found themselves lying on the dorm floor, surrounded by takeout boxes and half-finished wine. "You ever think about how far we've come?" Taehyung murmured. "All the time," Jungkook said, eyes on the ceiling. "Do you miss the version of us from before?" Jungkook was quiet for a long time. "I miss the simplicity, but I think I love this version more because we earned it." Taehyung nodded slowly. "Me too." They lay there not speaking until the wine ran out and the sun started creeping up again. Sleep came eventually, not as escape, but as rest, as safety. And when Taehyung went live again weeks later, the comment came up once more. "Do you miss Jungkook?" This time Taehyung didn't pause. He didn't smile to deflect. He just leaned into the mic, voice low and certain. "No," he said, "because the parts of him I used to miss, he gave them back." And somewhere off camera, Jungkook watched it live. He didn't cry, he didn't post, he didn't need to. He simply whispered, "So did you." Because this time there was no unfinished sentence, no frozen livestream, no awkward silence. Only music. And the memory of rain. It was the scent of chamomile that filled the studio that night, faint, familiar, the kind Taehyung always brewed when he couldn't sleep, when his thoughts moved too quickly for dreams to take hold. The kettle on the corner desk clicked off softly as steam curled upward into the dark air. He poured a cup slowly, fingers trembling only slightly from exhaustion, and carried it to the couch where Jungkook sat curled up, legs tucked beneath him, hoodie half-zipped, strands of hair falling over tired eyes. Neither had said much since arriving. They had practiced all day, laughed with the others, gone through interviews and fittings and more rehearsals. But now, in the quiet of the late hours, they didn't need to speak to fill the space. Not anymore. Taehyung placed the tea beside Jungkook, then sank into the cushion beside him, pulling the throw blanket over both of their legs. The studio lights were dim, just enough to cast soft shadows along the walls where soundproofing foam dulled the city's pulse. Jungkook reached for the cup without looking, fingers brushing Taehyung's hand, and held it like a memory, warm and grounding. "Do you ever think," Jungkook murmured after a while, his voice a rasp of vulnerability, "that if none of that had happened we wouldn't have become this?" Taehyung didn't answer right away. His gaze was on the corner of the ceiling, eyes half-lidded in thought. "I think about it more than I should," he admitted. "Sometimes I wonder what we lost during the silence, but lately I wonder more about what we gained because of it." Jungkook took a sip of tea. "We lost time." "We did," Taehyung agreed, "but maybe the time we have now is more honest." There was a comfort in the way the words settled. They didn't erase what happened before. They didn't try to rewrite the pain. They simply acknowledged it, held it gently like something fragile but worthy of keeping. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows just enough to remind them they were still grounded in the world. Jungkook leaned his head back, eyes fluttering closed, and whispered, "It's strange how silence can feel like punishment and later become peace." Taehyung reached out, his hand finding Jungkook beneath the blanket. "It became peace because we chose to fill it differently this time." That night they didn't go home. They drifted into sleep there in the studio, side by side as the lights dimmed themselves and the storm passed quietly over the city. And when the morning came, Jungkook awoke first. He turned his head to see Taehyung's slow, steady breathing, the way his hair curled slightly over his brow, the way his hand still rested near Jungkook's own. He stared for a long moment, just memorizing the stillness. This version of Taehyung, unguarded, soft, real, was the one he had missed most. Not the performer, not the idol, the man, the friend, the one who could say everything with a glance. He reached for his phone, snapped a quiet picture in the low light, then tucked the device away without posting anything. Some moments weren't meant for the world. A few days later, their team gathered them for a private discussion. There was talk of a short documentary project, one that followed their songwriting process and the emotional evolution behind the Still Here and After the Rain tracks. The producers wanted to focus on their creative chemistry, but also, inevitably, the quiet rift that had once separated them. "We don't need a scandal arc," one of the team leaders said carefully. "Just authenticity, your words, your story. You two are the story." Taehyung looked at Jungkook. Jungkook met his gaze and gave a nod. "If we're doing this," Taehyung said, "we're doing it our way." And so the cameras began to roll. The documentary, tentatively titled The Quiet Between Us, was filmed mostly in muted spaces. Rooftops, studio corners, long car rides, early mornings with coffee in hand and barely any makeup on their faces. They answered questions separately at first, but their words wove into each other's as if rehearsed, though none of it was. "I didn't stop talking that night because I was angry," Taehyung said to the camera. "I stopped because my heart didn't know how to respond to the truth it had been avoiding." Jungkook, later in his segment, admitted, "I waited for him to speak because I didn't know if I deserved to be forgiven for how distant I'd become. I think deep down, I was afraid his silence confirmed I was no longer welcome in his life." The honesty hit hard, not just for them but for fans across the world when the trailer eventually dropped. The clips were raw, Taehyung watching raindrops race each other down a car window, Jungkook fiddling with his rings while describing what it felt like to perform without Taehyung's voice beside him. It wasn't about romance. It wasn't about drama. It was about connection, breakage, and the slow, painful process of repairing what had been fractured. By the time the full documentary aired, ARMY was bracing themselves. But what they received was something different entirely. A love letter to friendship, to vulnerability, to silence, both the kind that breaks and the kind that heals. In one of the final scenes, Jungkook and Taehyung sat on opposite ends of a piano bench. There was no music playing, just them. "Play something," Taehyung said. "You first," Jungkook replied. So Taehyung did 3 notes, then stopped. "You left it incomplete," Jungkook said. "Because it's yours to finish," Taehyung answered, sliding off the bench and leaving Jungkook alone with the keys. It was symbolic, and the fans understood. After the documentary, something shifted again, deeper this time. The conversations online changed. The edits weren't just about longing glances and matching outfits. They were about growth, about showing up, about how 2 people who had every reason to walk away chose instead to rebuild, one note at a time. And for Jungkook and Taehyung, life moved on. But it wasn't just life as before, it was fuller now. When they toured together again, fans noticed the difference. On stage, they moved like 2 halves of the same heartbeat, not synchronized for the sake of choreography, but in sync because their rhythm was real again. Taehyung's harmonies wrapped around Jungkook's solos like a tether. Jungkook's eyes found Taehyung in the wings after every high note, like he needed him there to land safely. And when one night, during an encore, Taehyung reached out and pulled Jungkook into a side hug mid-song, neither of them laughed it off or acted surprised. They simply stayed there, shoulder to shoulder, present, whole, because some stories don't need grand conclusions. They just need the promise that this time, the silence will be filled with music, with truth, with the kind of love that doesn't need to be named to be felt. And that finally was enough.
Taehyung's voice froze mid-livestream the moment a fan mentioned Jungkook's name. What followed was silence, tension, and an emotion he couldn't hide. The camera had been rolling for 22 minutes. Taehyung's laughter echoed softly in the dim room, warm fairy lights casting a golden glow over the stacks of books, old vinyl records, and a barely sipped cup of coffee on his desk. His live broadcast felt like a cozy midnight confession, just him and ARMY. No scripts, no filters. His deep voice hummed softly as he read fan comments, eyebrows quirking at playful jokes, eyes softening at words of encouragement. The air was easy, comfortable, until it wasn't. "Oppa, do you miss Jungkook?" the comments said, floating up innocently between hearts and emojis. The shift was immediate. His mouth opened for a reply habit, instinct, but no sound came out. His lips paused mid-curve, smile faltering, and his eyes, those bright, expressive eyes, lost their gleam as if someone had cut the power behind them. The silence stretched. Taehyung blinked once, twice. His fingers, once gently tapping on the desk, stilled completely. The chat exploded. "Taehyung? Why did he stop? What happened? Did you see his face?" But he didn't look at the screen anymore. His gaze had dropped, almost imperceptibly, to his lap. and for a long, breathless moment, it seemed like he was no longer in the room. Like the name had transported him elsewhere, somewhere far from the fairy lights and coffee, deep into something he had locked away. Taehyung swallowed. The corner of his jaw clenched just slightly, a flicker of emotion too quick to pin down. Regret? Anger? Loss? It passed like a shadow across his features, but it lingered in his silence. Still, he said nothing. He reached for his coffee, fingers trembling just slightly, then stopped halfway and dropped his hand again. Then he smiled thin, polite, and almost painful. The kind of smile people wear when they want you to stop asking questions. "I think that's all for tonight," he whispered, almost too quietly for the mic to catch. And just like that, the live stream ended. But that was just the beginning. Backstage, Jimin had watched the live from his phone, frozen in place on the studio's hallway bench. He had seen that look before. The last time was in Busan, just days after the confrontation, the one no one outside the group had ever known about. And now, watching Taehyung fall apart in front of millions without saying a word, Jimin's heart clenched. He found him hours later on the rooftop, coat thin against the Seoul chill, smoke from his breath curling into the dark sky. Taehyung didn't turn when Jimin stepped closer, didn't flinch when he said, "You should have just answered." "I couldn't," Taehyung said. "If I did, it wouldn't have stopped there." Jimin sat beside him in the quiet, letting the wind do the talking for a while. "Still hurts?" Taehyung didn't answer, but his eyes were glassy, and that was enough. In the days that followed, ARMY trended hashtags. Theories spun out of control. Fans analyzed every second of the livestream freeze frame by frame. Some thought he was angry, others believed it was grief. Only a few whispered about a falling out. But none knew the truth. Only the 6 of them did. Yoongi noticed the shift during rehearsals. Taehyung's focus slipped. His voice cracked more than usual, and he kept looking toward the studio door like he expected someone to walk in. Namjoon tried to bring it up during practice breaks, but Taehyung brushed it off. "Just tired," he'd say. "Didn't sleep well." But the lie wore thin when he skipped a group meeting, and thinner still when he didn't respond to their group chat for 3 days straight. The night Jungkook returned to the studio was unannounced. He walked in wearing a cap pulled low, hoodie zipped up, hands in pockets, but it didn't hide the tension on his face. He didn't speak to anyone, not right away, just stood there for a moment, looking around like the room held ghosts. When he finally met Taehyung's eyes across the mirrored wall, something unspoken passed between them. The room froze. No one breathed. No one moved. Taehyung stood slowly, walked over, and stopped a foot away from him. The silence was electric. Then Jungkook whispered, "Why did you stop talking?" Taehyung's eyes burned. "Because if I talked, I would have said something I can't take back." That moment cracked something between them, raw and irreversible. Not quite healing, not quite destruction, just truth. Later that week, another livestream happened. This time, it was Jungkook. The atmosphere was different, calculated, measured. He looked good, too good, like someone trying to prove they were fine. ARMY flooded the comments with questions, but one stood out, rising to the top in flashing hearts. "Did you see Taehyung's live?" Jungkook smiled faintly. "Yeah," he said, then paused. "I miss a lot of things," he added. "It wasn't a confession. It wasn't an apology. But it was something." Back in the dorms, Taehyung sat in the dark, re-watching that clip, over and over. Something in his chest shifted. He wasn't sure if it was relief or pain. They hadn't spoken, not really. Not yet. But the silence had started to change. Not the cruel kind anymore. Not the empty one. Just a waiting silence, like a breath being held. Like a storm about to break or pass. And this time, when someone mentioned Jungkook, Taehyung didn't stop talking. He just whispered, "I hope he's okay." And somewhere across the city, Jungkook paused mid-step, as if he'd heard it. Because maybe, just maybe, some bonds weren't broken. Just waiting. The room felt smaller the moment Taehyung's voice faded into that fragile sentence. "I hope he's okay." It wasn't planned. It wasn't even something he intended to say out loud, but it slipped past his defenses like water through cracked stone. It was late. Too late for most fans to still be watching the replay of Jungkook's live. But that clip, that exact phrase, was already spreading like wildfire across platforms, tagged and re-uploaded, dissected and reinterpreted. The fandom was used to their silences, to their unspoken language. But this time, Taehyung's words didn't just echo, they detonated. Jungkook saw the clip an hour after it was posted. He was alone in the studio again, the air heavy with residual melodies and the faint smell of dust and wood polish. His phone buzzed quietly, again and again. At first, he ignored it. But something made him pause. Maybe it was the stillness. Maybe it was the way Taehyung's voice had sounded the last time they truly spoke. Jungkook didn't just watch the video. He replayed it 10 times. And with every repeat, the silence after Taehyung's words grew louder. It wasn't an apology, but it was something close, something trembling just beneath the surface. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling as if it held answers. The memory of that night resurfaced the night everything started to crack between them. It hadn't been dramatic, no yelling, no slammed doors, just a conversation that turned cold halfway through, like the warmth had been siphoned out of the room. A misunderstanding that festered in silence, too sharp to ignore, too painful to address. And now, months later, here they were, still orbiting each other, still not speaking the full truth. That night, Jungkook didn't go home. He stayed in the studio, scribbling lyrics that he wouldn't show anyone. Words like distance, if, and almost. By morning, he hadn't slept, but his heart felt a little less heavy. He made a decision. When he arrived at the company building the next day, he didn't take the usual back entrance. He walked through the front, hoodie off, head held high. Staff paused. Trainees whispered. He nodded politely but didn't slow down. He had one place to go, and only one person he needed to see. Taehyung was in practice room B, alone. Music played softly from the speakers, something old and jazzy, the kind of thing he listened to when he wanted to disappear into himself. He was mid-step, lost in motion, when the door creaked open. Their eyes met. Neither of them moved. Jungkook took a breath. "Do you want to talk?" Taehyung blinked. His chest rose and fell once, twice. "I didn't know if you'd come." "I wasn't going to," Jungkook admitted, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. "But then I saw your live, and it didn't feel right, staying quiet anymore." Taehyung sat on the floor without a word, stretching his legs in front of him. Jungkook joined him, leaving a space between them, but not too much. For a while, there was only silence, the kind that was thick with everything they hadn't said. "I never hated you," Taehyung said finally, eyes on the floor. "I never thought you did," Jungkook answered. "But I hated how much it hurt to pretend nothing was wrong." "I didn't mean for that live to go like that," Taehyung murmured. "I just froze. The moment your name came up, it was like my brain stopped working. Like my heart didn't know what to do." "I get it," Jungkook said. "Because every time someone asks about you, I answer like I'm fine. But I'm not." The honesty settled between them like soft ash. No judgment, just weight, just truth. "Do you remember that night in Busan?" Taehyung asked suddenly. Jungkook's throat tightened. "The last real night we hung out?" "Yeah. I've been replaying it," Taehyung said. "The street food, the ocean, us laughing like nothing could ever touch us. I remember thinking nothing had changed," Jungkook whispered, voice low. "Even though everything already had." Taehyung looked at him then, fully. His expression wasn't angry, just tired. Tired of pretending they were okay from afar. "I want to fix this." "So do I," Jungkook said. "But I don't know where to start." They sat there, bathed in the soft hum of the ceiling lights, and in that silence, something began to stitch itself back together. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. A few days later, the group gathered for a scheduled content shoot. The energy was light, cameras rolling, but even the staff noticed something had shifted. Jungkook and Taehyung weren't avoiding each other anymore. In fact, they were quietly aligned. Not loud, not forced, just present. During a break, Jimin slid beside Jungkook, nudging his arm. "You two finally talked, huh?" Jungkook gave a small smile. "Yeah." Jimin didn't press, just nodded, satisfied. "Good. It was time." Behind them, Taehyung watched the monitor, eyes scanning the playback, and when Jungkook looked over, Taehyung nodded once, Not a dramatic reconciliation, just a quiet understanding. Later, when the shoot was done, the 6 of them went out to eat. No managers, no cameras. Just them, like it used to be. Someone made a dumb joke. Yoongi nearly choked on his drink, and for the first time in months, Taehyung and Jungkook laughed in sync. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Back at the dorms, long after everyone else had fallen asleep, Taehyung found himself standing outside Jungkook's door. He hesitated, then knocked once. Jungkook opened it, sleep in his eyes. "I had a dream," Taehyung said. Jungkook raised a brow. "Yeah? You were singing," Taehyung said. "And I was just watching. But it wasn't the stage. It was like a rooftop. Nighttime. And I wasn't angry. I was proud." Jungkook's expression softened. "Sounds peaceful." Taehyung nodded. "It was. Want to talk more about it?" Jungkook offered, stepping aside. Taehyung hesitated, then shook his head. "Not yet. Just wanted you to know." He turned to leave, but Jungkook called softly. "Hey." Taehyung looked back. "I'm glad you stopped the live," Jungkook said. "If you didn't, I don't think I'd be here right now." Taehyung gave a tired smile. "Me too." When he walked away, Jungkook closed the door but leaned against it for a long moment, letting the weight of everything wash over him. Healing wasn't linear. Some days would still sting, but the silence between them was no longer empty. It held hope. And sometimes, that was enough. The weather shifted the next morning in a way that mirrored the atmosphere between them. Still unpredictable, cloudy but not storming. Taehyung awoke before his alarm, the city's gentle murmur beneath his window serving as the only soundtrack to a mind still tangled in unfinished thoughts. He stared at the ceiling, unmoving, fingers slightly curled in the blanket, Jungkook's voice echoing in fragments through his memory. "I'm glad you stopped the live." That sentence hadn't left him, not in his sleep, not in the quiet moments before the sun breached the horizon. It wasn't the words themselves, but the way Jungkook had said them, soft, almost vulnerable, like he had needed to say it before it drowned inside him. Taehyung exhaled through his nose and finally sat up, rubbing his temples. There was no script for reconciliation, no choreography. They were stumbling through it like dancers in the dark, reaching for each other without knowing if the other was still within reach. At the same time, Jungkook was also awake, hunched over his desk with earbuds in, replaying an unfinished demo. It wasn't anything meant for public ears, just a rough melody, half-sung lyrics, and the rhythmic ache of longing woven through his voice. He wasn't sure when he started writing about Taehyung again. Maybe it had never stopped. Maybe everything he wrote since the fallout had been a veiled message he was too afraid to send. He saved the file but didn't name it. Instead, he picked up his phone, hovered over Taehyung's name, and typed one word, "Coffee?" He didn't expect a reply right away, but it came before he could even lock the screen. Now. Half an hour later, they sat across from each other at a small cafe tucked between alleyways, disguised by potted plants and soft jazz humming through the speakers. It was one of those places they used to frequent before the silence had settled in before that one night, when everything started to splinter. Neither of them addressed that yet. They talked around it, like two architects examining a cracked foundation without daring to press too hard in case it collapsed entirely. "You're working on something new?" Taehyung asked, lifting his cup, eyes briefly meeting Jungkook's. Jungkook nodded, fingers toying with the sleeve of his hoodie. "Yeah, something personal. That demo you sent me last year, was it about me?" Jungkook hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." Taehyung didn't look away. "I thought so." A beat passed. "I didn't hate it." That pulled a slight laugh from Jungkook. "Didn't hate it? That's high praise coming from you." Taehyung smiled faintly. "I hated the reason it had to be written." Jungkook's eyes darkened with understanding. "Me too." The truth lingered between them, soft and heavy. They didn't apologize, not yet, not directly, but they didn't need to. Every sentence, every pause, every glance was a layer peeled back, a vulnerability exposed. Later that day, they returned to the company building together. The staff noticed, of course. Whispers trailed behind them like echoes. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the way Taehyung didn't flinch when Jungkook stood beside him in the elevator. What mattered was, that they didn't avoid each other's gaze during rehearsals. Their first performance together after the livestream incident was for a private fan event, intimate, raw, the kind of setting where even the smallest expressions didn't go unnoticed. When Taehyung stepped forward for his solo part, Jungkook instinctively looked at him, eyes locked, and Taehyung looked back. That moment, that silent communion, set the internet ablaze. Fans captured it, shared it, zoomed in on the exact frame where Jungkook's mouth twitched into a smile and Taehyung's shoulders seemed to ease. The fandom didn't need explanations, they could read the spaces between breaths. The reunion wasn't publicized, wasn't confirmed in statements or interviews. But it was there. Days passed, then weeks. They started spending time in the studio together again, not always talking, but existing in the same space without tension. Music became their language when words failed. Taehyung hummed harmonies to Jungkook's demos. Jungkook played guitar while Taehyung scribbled lyrics on coffee-stained napkins. But healing wasn't linear. One evening, during a vocal session, Taehyung snapped. "You're pushing too hard," he said sharply as Jungkook went over a chorus for the 6th time, jaw clenched. "I'm fine," Jungkook insisted. "No, you're not. You haven't been fine since before we even started this." Jungkook froze, the room charged with something electric and raw. "And what about you? You think you've been fine?" Taehyung's eyes flashed. "I never said I was." "Then stop acting like this is just about me," Jungkook said, voice low. "You left too, Taehyung. You stopped calling. You disappeared." "I didn't know how to come back," Taehyung whispered, and the room fell still. "I didn't know if you wanted me to," he added, barely audible. The fight dissolved into silence. No dramatic walkouts. Just two boys, bruised by their own silence, realizing the damage wasn't from one punch, but 1,000 unsaid things. That night, Jungkook sent a voice memo instead of a text. "I miss who we were. Not just the public version. The real us. The way we used to talk about anything. I know it won't be the same again, but maybe it can be something new, if you want that too." Taehyung listened to it 3 times before replying. "Come over." They sat on Taehyung's rooftop, wrapped in blankets, watching the city lights flicker below them like stars fallen from the sky. "I was afraid that if we talked again," Taehyung said, "we'd ruin whatever was left." Jungkook looked at him. "But we didn't. We're still here." Taehyung nodded. "Yeah, we are." He passed Jungkook his phone. "Play me the demo." Jungkook hesitated, then pressed play. The song was rough, honest, a little out of tune in places, but it carried every emotion he hadn't been able to say. And when it ended, Taehyung's eyes were wet. "You're stupid for writing something that beautiful and hiding it," he whispered. Jungkook laughed through a shaky breath. "I was waiting for the right time." Taehyung leaned his head on his shoulder. "This is the right time." And so they began again, not from where they left off, but from where they were now. Changed, yes, but not broken. Never broken. In the following weeks, a surprise announcement shook the fandom. A digital release titled "Silence Never Meant Goodbye." A collaborative single written and performed by Jungkook and Taehyung. No teasers, no promotional photos, just a drop, unexpected and raw. The lyrics told a story of distance, of pain, of reconciliation, fans cried. Critics praised, and ARMY knew without needing confirmation that this was their way of speaking the truth. One night, during an interview, a journalist cautiously brought up the moment Taehyung stopped mid-live. Taehyung didn't look away this time. He glanced at Jungkook, who gave a slight nod. "I froze," Taehyung said steady. "Because I was scared. But sometimes, you have to stop before you can really start talking again." And that was it. No scandals, no drama, just healing. And the silent, unshakable bond between two souls who found their way back. The rain started sometime after midnight. A soft patter at first, like whispers against the glass, then slowly growing steadier, heavier. In the silence of Jungkook's apartment, it was the only sound aside from the occasional creak of the wooden floor as he paced barefoot, hoodie hanging off one shoulder, a mug of untouched tea cooling on the windowsill. The city outside was a blur of lights distorted by rain, and for a long moment, he just watched it, chest rising and falling with a rhythm that didn't match the storm. He hadn't slept. Again. The rush of the release, the way silence never meant goodbye, had shattered the internet, should have brought him peace, closure, or at least rest. But instead, it unearthed everything he'd buried. Not pain this time, not anger, just memory. The way Taehyung used to hum in the green room before every performance. The way they used to speak in glances. Full conversations passed in a second with no words. The way the quiet between them once felt like safety, not exile. The notification lit up his phone screen with a soft buzz. A message. "Are you awake?" Jungkook didn't answer right away. He just stared at the words like they might burn through the screen. Then, finally, he typed back. "Yeah, can't sleep." "Me neither," Taehyung replied. "Then, wanna go for a drive?" By the time Jungkook stepped out into the hallway, Taehyung was already leaning against the far wall, hoodie up, hands in pockets, rain dripping from the edge of his sleeves. They didn't speak at first. No greeting, no explanations. Just an understanding passed in silence as they walked together through the parking garage and climbed into Taehyung's car. The roads were mostly empty, Seoul half asleep under the weight of the storm. Taehyung drove without a destination, one hand on the wheel, the other tapping restlessly against the doorframe. Music played low through the speakers, an old jazz track they'd once listened to on tour, when things were simple and the only thing that mattered was the next stage. "Do you remember Osaka?" Taehyung asked after a while, voice soft, almost drowned by the rain. Jungkook turned his head. "The hotel or the night market?" Taehyung smiled faintly. "Both. But the market. That night you dragged me to find that one takoyaki stand you swore was the best in the city." "It was," Jungkook said with a laugh. "You just didn't want to admit it because your favorite place was closed." "It started raining then too," Taehyung said, eyes still on the road. "But we didn't run. We just stood there, eating like idiots, soaked to the bone." Jungkook's laughter faded into a sigh. "That was the last time I saw you cry. Quietly. You thought I didn't notice." Taehyung's grip on the steering wheel tightened slightly. "I had a nightmare that morning. About losing everything. Us, the group. I didn't know why. It made no sense back then. But now it does," Jungkook said quietly. The car rolled to a stop near the Han River, their favorite spot before everything went quiet between them. They sat in silence, the rain creating ripples across the windshield, city lights shimmering in broken patterns on the water beyond. "Do you still think about what would have happened if we'd talked earlier?" Taehyung asked.